So are we diving in? Are we having some interesting discussions? Oh, I would love to have heard. Okay, good. Make sure you write your questions down, please. Is anyone totally confused? You probably don't want to admit it. Because part of the problem is that, yes, sometimes it's hard because we're sifting through, okay, what the church has been teaching, but now what's being proposed, and, you know, what other churches are adopting, and we haven't yet gotten to the actual point of the day, which is Humanae Vitae. So if I could just have everyone take their seats again. So I apologize if you're kind of in that that in-between point where, wait, I'm not really sure what I should be thinking. If you're still thinking that after this next talk, then I failed. Okay? But it's understandable because in a way it's kind of like we've just been stirring up the dust. And we've got to set the context, and understand. Now we can understand the really miraculous gift that Humanae Vitae is to us. That it's not this horrible, oppressive document, which is so often how it's represented by those who really don't understand its true spirit and human nature. So a couple times it's been mentioned to me that we have some people from a little bit further away. So I understand we have some people from Pennsylvania. Who's here from Pennsylvania? Okay, back there. Woo, wonderful. Okay, can I assume it's Eastern Pennsylvania? Are you from Eastern Pennsylvania? Wonderful. Okay, how about we have from Virginia? Who's here from Virginia? So great. Obviously, Washington, D.C. Who's Washington, D.C.? Okay. Maryland? We got the Maryland people. How about Florida? Who's here from Florida? I'm just kidding. Delaware. I noticed Delaware. Where's our Delaware group? Wonderful. Thank you. Anyone from New Jersey, New York? Okay. Woohoo! Wonderful. Arizona, yeah. China. Thank you so much. Okay. It's just lovely to have us all have an opportunity to come together. Please know that I pray regularly for Couples for Christ all around the world. I have my very specific names in Manila, in Baltimore, in California. So do know that I pray for you by name. And you are always very close to my heart. So, all right, congratulations. We've arrived at the last talk of the day. And, let me just let's see. And it's entitled Humanae Vitae and Human Happiness, the Courage of Pope Paul VI and the Inseparability Principle. So, piece of cake, right? We've been doing all the hard work. All right, it's just kind of getting the wheels greased. So in this talk, we're going to tackle the core teaching of Humanae Vitae itself, which is why we've had to set the context of everything that we've talked about so far. And one more thing sets the context for Humanae Vitae, which are the actual teachings of Vatican II on spousal love and marriage. We didn't look at those. We looked at the 1917 Code of Canon Law. We looked at Casti Connubii, but we haven't actually looked at Gaudium et Spes. We looked at it earlier, but it has a beautiful section, numbers 47 to 51, which are on marriage and conjugal love. So we already quoted Gaudium et Spes, GS, in the first talk. Who remembers? How did we refer to it? What quote did we refer to in the first talk? 22. Jesus Christ fully reveals man to man himself and makes the supreme calling clear. So now we're going to look a little bit at 47 to 51, because this is important, because we're going to see how Paul VI lifts from the language of Gaudium et Spes and at times quotes it directly. Which is why when people say that Humanae Vitae is really not part of official church teaching, because Paul VI was just giving his own opinion, they don't know church documents. They don't know this history that we've gone through. So again, how do you respond to that? If someone says, well, it was just Paul VI's opinion. You say, no, actually it wasn't. Because he was building on the 1917 Code of Canon Law. He was quoting Casti Connubii, and he built it upon Gaudium et Spes. Wouldn't it be great if you could just come right out with that? But that's what you'll be able to do after, if you study, right? Write it down on a 3x5 card. But that's the reality, is that Humanae Vitae is firmly anchored in Gaudium et Spes. All right, so let's see. Let's look quickly at a couple quotes from Gaudium et Spes 48 to see how the language, again, we're looking at this development of doctrine, of the language about marriage and conjugal love. So we want to see, we saw how it started, where we started in 1917, and then how Casti Connubii introduced this idea of perfection, and even more built on and developed this understanding of marriage as a sacrament, as this reflection of the archetype of Christ and his love for the church. And so we want to see how Vatican II and Gaudium et Spes further develop this. So here's how the Council Fathers describe marriage in Gaudium et Spes 48. Now notice the difference in the language from the 1917 Code of Canon Law. The intimate partnership of married life and love. Right there, that should tell you, well, this is different. Because it's not talking about rights over each other's bodies for those acts that are suitable to the generation of children. Listen to this language. Remember what Paul VI wanted? Reformulate the immutable teaching of the church, but in new, fresh language. The intimate partnership of married life and love has been established by the Creator and qualified by His law, and is rooted in the conjugal covenant of irrevocable personal consent. Isn't that beautiful? So different. Hence, by that human act whereby spouses mutually bestow and accept each other, a relationship arises which by divine will and the eyes of society too is a lasting one. So instead of saying rights over each other's bodies, what does Gaudium et Spes say? What language do they use? Human acts whereby spouses do what? Mutually bestow and accept each other. The reason that language is used is it's the language that's spoken about how Christ gives himself to the church. Christ bestows himself, his gift of self, to the church. So it's echoing that language. Look at that very first sentence, in intimate partnership of life and love. There's another that's very important in there. It's no longer spoken about as a contract. Instead, how is marriage referred? A covenant. This is bells and whistles. This is big stuff. This is like fireworks. The language changes to this language of covenant. Why? Because God created a covenant with his people in the Old Testament. That's the way his love was expressed. And Jesus says this is the blood of the new covenant. So the language of Christianity is the language of covenant. It's a beautiful development of doctrine. Let's go on to the next one. By their very nature, the institution of matrimony itself and conjugal love are ordained for the procreation and education of children, and find in them their ultimate crown. So what's he referring to? Right, 1917 Code. Which draws all the way back on Augustine. So if you know, like you read that, okay, the institution of matrimony itself and conjugal love are ordained for the procreation and education of children. You know, okay, he's standing in the unbroken teaching of the church. But notice he's using different language. Does he say primary end? No, he doesn't. He says marriage and conjugal love. Really important shift. What's ordained to the procreation and education of children? Just the conjugal act? No, marriage. The whole reality of marriage and the whole reality of conjugal love find their crown, find their perfection, their full flourishing in children and their education. Thus a man and woman render mutual help. When you hear mutual help, what should that ring for you? Right? The secondary end, mutual help from the Code of Canon Law. and service to each other through an intimate union of their persons and of their actions. So notice how this language is dropped and what language is used instead. How do you render as married couples mutual help to each other? Union. Union in communion. Because that's the language of covenant. So can you see how our understanding of marriage and conjugal love is deepening? We're not just talking in contractual juridical language. We're now talking in personalistic kind of language. So I've kind of described. Anything else you notice about that language of Gaudium et Spes? Anything else that, of those two quotes? Well, say it again? Matrimony. The use of the word matrimony, right? Because it's the sacrament of matrimony. So anytime matrimony is used, that's invoking the whole context of marriage as a capital S sacrament. Excellent. Anything else?
Service.
Service. In service, right? They render this service to each other. Mutual help in service. Again, how? Through their intimate union and of their persons and their actions. Do your actions matter? Yes. And does every action matter? Yes. Okay, good. Let's go on. I just want to make a couple observations. As I mentioned, the language is much more personalistic. And when we say language is personalistic, it means the emphasis is on the person who enters into the conjugal covenant, not just on the acts. You see, when we use this kind of language, we're talking about an act. And it's almost as if it's separated from a person. The primary end of sex is procreation. The secondary end is procreation and education of children. The secondary end is mutual help and remedying of concupiscence. It isolates the act from the person. And so what Vatican II has done, beginning with Casti Connubii, is make the person central and understand that the marital act is an act of a human person. So we have to understand who a human person is, which is why we did the first talk, to understand God's ultimate plan for us. The other thing is, notice that Gaudium et Spes begins by describing what marriage is. It doesn't start with the act, the conjugal act. It says this is marriage. It's a partnership of life and love. That's the first time, as far as I know, that those two words are paired in that way. An intimate partnership of life and love. Those are going to come back in Humanae Vitae. So what this tells us is that sexual intercourse isn't an isolated act, but it always has to be understood within the context of both the person who enacts the conjugal embrace and marriage and conjugal love, which is the context in which the conjugal embrace is meant to occur. So again, I love how Gaudium et Spes speaks about the mutual bestowing and accepting of each other, or we could say receiving the mutual gift of self and the receiving of the other's gift of self. So this is central to our understanding of conjugal love and the conjugal act, that the giving and the receiving is total. So this mutual bestowal and this mutual receiving, this is one of the things in other talks I really work hard on, is our capacity to receive other people. So it's something we talk about a lot. But all of us have a potential to fully receive another person, or the person that I'm speaking with, or this person that I'm simply interacting with. And this is a disposition that is very important that we work on receiving. You as a culture have this. It's your charism of hospitality. When you exercise your charism of hospitality, you're receiving the people that come into your midst. And you know, people say, they're so friendly. They're so nice. I like being with them. What they're saying is, they received me. So this is an integral part of marriage, a total giving and a total receiving of the other. This language of primary and secondary end occurs nowhere in the Vatican, in Gaudium et Spes. That's really important. Does that mean it's no longer important? No, because we saw it's tucked in there, but it's no longer in this hierarchy. So it's just an important thing to note, that the language of the hierarchy of ends is no longer used in Gaudium et Spes. Does that mean we changed our teaching? No, it means that we're developing it, as we saw in Casti Connubii, to expand our understanding of marriage and marital love. Not in this way, but in this way. Let's go on. So in addition, Gaudium et Spes develops even more explicitly marriage as a sacrament and a pathway to holiness. I don't want to stop here and read the quote, but it was shocking for me when I learned that one of the original drafts of Gaudium et Spes, way back in the very beginning, proposed explicitly that marriage was not a pathway to holiness. Is that shocking to you? It should be. This is how far the church has come. That we have this robust understanding that marriage is precisely a pathway to sanctification. But that was not the way the original document was drafted. So that's why GS 48, it's so important to realize how this is going on and being more fully developed. So now the Savior of men and the spouse of the church comes into the lives of married Christians through the sacrament of matrimony. He abides with them thereafter, so that just as he loved the church and handed or bestowed himself over on her behalf, the spouses may love each other with perpetual fidelity through mutual self-bestowal. So can you see how they're using the same language of how Christ bestowed himself to the church? This is how spouses are to bestow themselves to each other in a way that's total. But the reason I wanted to emphasize this is notice how it says the very first part, that Christ comes into the lives of married Christians. You're not left on your own. It's not like marriage is here and grace is over here and too bad for you because you're married. Remember what we saw in Casti Connubii, this idea that grace perfects nature. It perfects natural love. So let's go on to the next quote from 48 that really punches how marriage is a specific pathway to holiness. Authentic married love is caught up into divine love and is governed and enriched by Christ's redeeming power. Do you have the power of Christ available to you in the sacrament of matrimony? I sure hope so. You're not left on your own. So that this love may lead spouses where? To God with powerful effect, and may aid and strengthen them. Can you see the theme over and over and over again? God wants to walk with you. He is there with you. You are never left alone in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health. Christ is part of your marriage. And for all of us who are baptized Catholics, so all of us who are single, when we're going through hard times, the same promise is given to us. Single people, how do we develop fidelity? How do you develop fidelity to your future spouse? By being faithful to your commitments and your friendships now. You know those times when you've committed to going to a Couples for Christ, a Singles for Christ event on a Friday night, and something much better comes up? What do? You exercise fidelity. And you go to what you've committed yourself to. But we live in a culture, anyone who works in singles ministry, young adult ministry knows this. When do singles and young adults RSVP for an event? You know it, right? The day before, if you're lucky. Sometimes they just show up. Why? Because they want to make sure nothing better comes along. Okay, let's just think about that and apply it to marriage. Do you see how we're doing marriage prep all the time, even if we don't realize it? If that's the way you've been accustomed to living your single life, and now you're married and something better comes along, what's to keep you in your marriage? This is why marriage is just not something we suddenly fall into once we fall in love. It's something we're preparing either for or against by our actions right up to it. So this is so important for all of us. Okay, so may aid and strengthen them for the sublime office of being a father or mother. So notice, God It's integrally connected with being a parent, marriage. Thus, they increasingly advance, here's my favorite line, what is it? The perfection of their own personalities. Notice it doesn't say they increasingly advance in the perfection of their prayer life. It's your whole person. God wants to bring all of you into salvation, into the fullness of who you were created to be. It's every single aspect of who you are. Remember, we're not souls trapped in bodies. And our goal is not to liberate the soul from the body. You are a human person, and it is all of you that is meant to be sanctified and redeemed, because it's all of you, including your masculine and feminine body, that's going to heaven. This is the work of perfection. It's the work of our personalities here and now, as well as their mutual sanctification, and hence contribute jointly to the glory of God. Did we see anything about the glory of God in the majority report or the final report? Unless I missed it, I didn't see it there. I mean, that's like the crescendo. Your marriage is for your own sanctification and perfection, and that gives glory to God. So that when people see you, they say, oh my gosh, God must exist. Look at how happy they are. Look at their joy. Look at the way they relate to their children, the way their children relate to them. They've been married 54 years. That's impossible. How can that be? And you're like, glory to God. This is the real stuff of marriage. Okay, now we get to move ahead a few more years to Paul VI and the writing of Humanae Vitae. So remember, this is ending in 65. The Birth Control Commission is continuing to meet. It gives its final report and the pastoral approaches to Paul VI in 1966, the summer of 1966. When was Humanae Vitae released? 1968. Okay, I'm not brilliant at math, but even I can figure out that's 2 years. It's not like he just sat down and whipped it out in 2 months. 2 years, my brothers and sisters. This was not a light task. First of all, he had to read through and consider the majority report and the pastoral approaches of the Birth Control Commission, and sift through it and try to figure out what's good and what's off the mark. Then he had to study, I'm sure, again, the unbroken teaching of the church on marriage, beginning, of course, with Scripture, Old Testament and New Testament, Jesus Christ, but then continuing through Augustine, St. Thomas Aquinas, Leo XIII, who we didn't even look at, Casti Connubii, Gaudium et Spes. Then he had to consult other writers and theologians. For instance, Karol Wojtyla, who wrote Love and Responsibility. John Paul II wrote this as a series of lectures in 1958-59. It's incredible. I asked myself multiple times, how much did Paul VI draw from Love and Responsibility? Because I read through it and I think, oh my gosh, like that shows up in Love and Responsibility. And we know that he knew. We know that he read it because he knew Karol Wojtyla. He was on the Birth Control Commission. So how much of Love and Responsibility did he draw from? How much from other writers? And then he had to pray and pray and pray for wisdom, for discernment, for guidance, for light of the Holy Spirit. And remember what's going on socially. Pressure, pressure, pressure to do what? Change the church's teaching. Because the majority report got leaked to the press in 1967. So this pressure, this expectation, the church is going to change your teaching, the church is going to change your teaching. Can you imagine being in his hot seat? Who here would have wanted to be Paul VI? Oh my goodness. What incredible pressure and responsibility he was under. In this book, in the opening commentary, let me see if I can find it quickly, there is a line that it's a good thing. I hope I never meet the person who wrote this. Otherwise, well, maybe it's a good thing because then I could really exercise charity. But here's what he says. Most frustrating of all must have been the ease with which the Pope dismissed the carefully constructed arguments of the majority report, the final report, for accepting a new approach to resolving the issue of contraception. Do you think he just dismissed it with ease? I don't think so. And also not because of how carefully he responds to it in Humanae Vitae and picks out what he can, but points out what he cannot embrace as the vicar of Christ. Wow, I just cannot imagine. Okay, so fortunately for us, Humanae Vitae is not a very long document. It only has 31 sections. So my great hope is that after today, you will go home and read it within the next 24 hours. Because tomorrow's Sunday, right? It's the Lord's Day. Because otherwise, Monday, everything starts again. But just read through it within 24 hours and let it speak to you. Remember, this is not just about what happens in the bedroom. This is about life. This is about who we are as human persons. And I especially want to encourage the young adults and the single people here to read it, because it is meant to speak to us as well. We're going to focus in on numbers 7 through 12, because that's the heart, that's the core of the teaching. And we've already heard so much, I thought it would be best just to focus our attention. But I think it's valuable, before we jump to 7 to 12, to note that in numbers 5 through 6, so if you haven't pulled out your handout for this talk, please do, that in numbers 5 to 6 of Humanae Vitae, just before the section we're going to address, Paul VI acknowledges the work of the Birth Control Commission. But he recognizes that the conclusions of the commission used, and now I quote, certain methods and criteria that departed from the firm and constant teaching of the magisterium on what is moral within marriage. Who can tell me what's he saying in a very diplomatic way? Pardon me?
It's intrinsically equal.
Well, he's saying I can't agree with what the Birth Control Commission gave me, because, again, their methods and the judgments that they used were not valid. So he had to recognize that, just right up front. And that's all that he says. Okay, so let's tackle the core teaching of Humanae Vitae. We'll begin with number 7. So Humanae Vitae is divided into various sections, and the sections have a title, and the titles are instructive. Number 7, the title is A Total Vision of Man. What kind of vision of the human person? A total vision, right? Which means from the beginning all the way through to eternity. That's the total vision of man. So this sets the context, this total vision of man, for everything else Paul VI is going to say about the human person who expresses conjugal love by entering into marriage and the conjugal embrace. Would you please circle those 4 words? He's going to talk about the human person who expresses conjugal love by entering to marriage and the conjugal embrace. Right, so it's person, human person, conjugal love, what's the next part? Marriage, and then the conjugal embrace. So in order to understand these 3, we have to understand the human person, because it's the human person who expresses conjugal love, who enters into marriage, and who enacts that love in the conjugal embrace. What we call sex, but I'm going to avoid using that word. Here we go, number 7. Rather, the question, meaning the question of conjugal love and responsible parenthood, must be addressed in such a way that the whole man, and whenever he uses the word man, notice it's capitalized. So he means humanity, the human person. So that the whole human person and the whole mission, this is such an important word. Does Couples for Christ have a mission? Of course you do. What is it?
Build the church of the home and the church of the poor.
No, it's renewing families. Families in the Holy Spirit. Renewing? Yes. Families in the Holy Spirit, renewing the face of the earth. That's your mission. He's saying here, marriage has a mission. It's so critical. It's not just we like being together. She makes me happy. I hope you like being together. And I hope that there are times when you experience elation. but you have a mission that you've been entrusted with. So this mission, the whole mission to which he has been called, will be taken into account, for this mission pertains not only to his natural and earthly existence, but also to the supernatural and eternal existence. In other words, we can't understand marriage unless we also understand what? Heaven. Unless we understand eternity, God's plan for us. So that's why we had to look in the first talk. What's God's eternal plan for you? What's the straight stick? One flesh union with the glorified body of Christ in our glorified bodies. You see, how we understand heaven influences the whole way we understand our life here on earth. So that was number 7. In number 8, Paul VI introduces the concept of conjugal love as originating not from evolutionary chance. He doesn't use those words, but I'm going to use those words because I want to contrast it. But because he introduces conjugal love as originating from God, who is love. We saw that, right? He's Trinitarian love, the Father pouring himself out in total gift of love to the Son, Son pouring himself out in total gift of love to the Father, and the Holy Spirit overflowing as the fruit of their total self-giving love. So conjugal love finds its origin in God who is love and God who is Father. Now, why would he say God who is Father? Because when we say Father, we mean the source of life. So what is he pairing here together? What 2 words? Love and life. What did we see in God in Spes? Marriage is an intimate partnership of love and life. Do you see where he got it from? This is why you have to know God in Spes. After speaking about God in himself being both love and life, Paul VI then describes God's design for human love by using the language of Gaudium et Spes 48 and also Casti Connubii 23-24. So as I read this, see if you can identify, again, the traditional language of church teaching as well as the new language being used to describe God's plan for married love. Number 8, therefore through mutual self-giving, which is unique and exclusive to them, spouses seek a communion of persons. Through this communion, the spouses perfect each other so that they might share with God the task of procreating and educating new living beings, offspring, children. Moreover, for the baptized, matrimony is endowed with such dignity that it is a sacramental sign of grace representing the union of Christ and his church. Okay, what in there is from other documents? Tell me. Love and life? Okay, what else?
Communion.
Actually, we haven't yet seen communion. We didn't see that in Casti Connubii. But we're going to get to that.
Persons.
Okay, what else comes from other documents? Right, good. Procreating and educating children. What else?
Sacramental.
Good, exactly, sacramental. Excellent. Christ, good, representing the union of Christ and the church. That language has been used ever since Thomas Aquinas. What about the spouses? Perfect. Where's that from? Casti Connubii and Gaudium et Spes. Good, what else? Okay, what about, unique and exclusive. It's another way of saying these two. This unity, right, this fidelity, we said it was exclusive, and the indissolubility. Okay, now what's new? You gave me one already. Communion. That word communion. That appeared, the communion of persons, as far as I know, was used for the first time in an official church document in Vatican II and in Gaudium et Spes. So that's a development of doctrine, of language, of speaking about communion of persons. What else is this new language of Vatican II and Humanae Vitae in that very first line? Mutual self-giving. Exactly, this idea that I give myself totally. I make a gift of myself. We didn't have that language before Vatican II. This mutual self-giving. What else? Also the word communion. So this is the mutual self-giving, communion of persons, and communion. This is the new language. One of the highly significant changes of language in speaking about marriage that began with Gaudium et Spes, and now we see continues in Humanae Vitae, is speaking about both God and marriage as a communion of persons. We didn't have this before. We didn't speak about the Trinity as a communion of persons. And we didn't speak about marriage as a communion of persons. But Gaudium et Spes speaks about it, and Humanae Vitae now picks that up and says God is a communion of persons, and married people are called to a communion of persons. Section 9, let's go on, is a wonderful section on the characteristics of conjugal love that I think many of you might already be familiar with without even knowing it. So Paul VI says, here we go, here are the characteristics. Marital love, conjugal love is human, free, total, faithful, and fruitful. Ever heard that before? Free, total, faithful, fruitful? Who's heard that before? Who have you heard say it before? Christopher West. Guess where Christopher West got it from? Humanae Vitae, number 9. Isn't that something? It's right here. Humanae Vitae, number 9. That conjugal love is human. What does that mean, to be human? It means, he says, it's composed of both the senses and the spirit. How have we been referring to senses and the spirit, meaning body, spirit? A unique body-spirit combo, right? So marital love is both bodily and it's also spiritual. That's why it's fully human, because to be a human person is to be embodied. And so conjugal love, to be fully human, has to involve both the body and the spirit. Excellent. Free. That means it's not coerced. There's no such thing as a shotgun wedding where you have to get married, because the marriage is formed by free consent. But notice it's also not motivated by supercharged romantic feelings, but it's an act of the will. Does love involve feelings? I sure hope so, because conjugal love is both bodily and spiritual. But we make a mistake if we equate love with supercharged romantic feelings, which is what many people do. That's why you really need to give those supercharged romantic feelings time to see if they stick around and if they really reflect the true character of this person. So it's free, meaning it's an act of the will. I have freely chosen this with my will. So what happens is that by freely choosing this, they become one in heart and soul, and that they obtain their human perfection. Beautiful. Again, this is what he says. Through this freedom, they become one of heart and soul and obtain perfection. Again, echoes of Casti Connubii. Total. That means you're sharing everything down to the last flake in the total box, right? Without reservation. You're making a total, not a partial gift of self, right? This is one of the evils of contraception, is it says it's normal to make only partial gift of self. This is why we have such a disaster going on in so many people's sexual lives, because they've grown up being told it's normal to only make a partial gift of self. And conjugal love is total. It's the total giving and the total what else? Receiving. What if I said, you know, I'm happy to be married to you, but I don't want this part, this part, this part of you. That's what we're saying in contraception. I like these parts of you, but this part, no. I want to bracket that out. It's not conjugal love, because conjugal love is total. It is faithful. In other words, it's exclusive. They unite themselves by means of the marital covenant bond that has no exceptions to the rule of fidelity. Right? You're not, I'm faithful except for, no. It is faithful and exclusive. It's fruitful. Here's what Paul VI says. This love is fruitful, since the whole of love is not contained in the communion of spouses. Isn't that interesting? Listen to that. It's fruitful because the whole of love is not contained in the communion of spouses. He goes on to say, it also looks beyond itself and seeks to raise up new lives. Isn't this what the Trinity does? Do the Father and Son just look to themselves? Like, we've got a nice thing going on, we don't need anything else? No! We see that the whole of their love can't be contained just in their relationship. The whole of their love overflows. It spills out. It's also an image of Christ on the cross. After he was dead, what did the soldiers do? Pierced his side. And what happened? His body overflowed. Flowed out with blood and water. Symbols of baptism and the Eucharist. You see, love can't be contained. The image of Christ pierced on the cross is profound because we can see it. That even after he dies, Christ still wants to keep giving the totality of himself to us. It overflows. And it's an image of what our human nature is created for. Not to just create this kind of, what can we call it? Private life. That's what we're told, right? The right to privacy, which, as you know, I hope you know, doesn't exist in our Constitution. It was made up by the Supreme Court. And so we have come to think of marriage or as sexual activity as something that happens privately between two people, as if that's it and nothing else. No, our whole human nature is meant to overflow. So to reinforce the importance of fruitfulness, Paul VI quotes Gaudium et Spes 50 directly. So follow along. This is what he quotes this directly. Marriage and conjugal love are ordained by their very nature to the procreating and educating of children. Right, so he's just repeating Gaudium et Spes 48, which echoes the unbroken teaching of the Church. Offspring are clearly the supreme gift of marriage, a gift that contributes immensely to the good of the parents themselves. Would you please circle that word good? Children are a gift that contributes immensely to the good of their parents. How many of you who are parents would say, oh yes, my children contribute immensely to my good? Okay, I'm glad to see some of you. You're like, well, depends on the day. That means we need to ask ourselves, what does it mean that something is a good for us? I already alluded to this. Something is a good for us if it moves our human nature from potential to actualization to full actualization to perfection. Something is bad if it takes us away from that, if it deforms us, if it impedes us. So children, parents, are good for you because what do they do for you? Yeah, they move you, hopefully, along this spectrum for the perfection of your human nature.
Children, listen.
But here's the problem. Parents, do you feel good about your children all the time? Come on, let's be honest. I'm sure there are occasions when you don't feel good. You see, our culture has changed the rules to say that something that is a good for me is only good if it makes me feel good. This is where we've got to be smart. That something is not good because it makes me feel good. But yet that's what our culture says. Something could make you feel good and be a good. But those two don't always get paired together. So for instance, can you think of something that is a good for you but doesn't make you feel good, but rather requires pain, exercise, sacrifice, or giving up what you want? I mean, come on, let's just list them. Sometimes going to Mass on Sunday. Right? Sometimes sitting down and listening to a friend. Sometimes taking a friend to the airport. Think about all the times we have to sacrifice, and it doesn't always feel good, but it is a good for me. So if it's a good, it helps move us along this path, and it helps us grow and mature in our personality and as a disciple of Jesus Christ. That's on the path to full perfection. It also, as we saw, corresponds to both our earthly and our eternal vocation. That's why we always have to take God into account. And it helps us live the gospel commandment. What did Jesus say? What's his command? Love one another as I have loved you. How did he love? Totally. Doesn't always feel good, but it is a good at times. So sometimes something that's good will bring us joy. It'll be pleasant, but sometimes it will require tremendous struggle and sacrifice and delaying what we want. Even sometimes getting our legitimate needs met. Like when we abstain from meat or food on Friday in Lent. It's good, but you delay it. Okay, children, wonderfully small, fall smack into this category of how the nature of marriage and conjugal love are actualized. Because it's not only the human person, it's also conjugal love and marriage that are called to be actualized. They have this potential. Right? Marriage has the potential to be unitive and fruitful. And so children help to actualize that. From potential to actualization to full actualization. So let's go back to Guidance Spes 48 for a moment, where the Council Fathers continue to develop marriage as a capital S sacrament, because I want you to see again how much they emphasize how God wants to be a part of our struggles, of the demands that he makes on us. This love may lead the spouses to God with powerful effect and may aid and strengthen them, there's that language again, for in the sublime office of being a father and mother. We saw this. So for this reason, Christian spouses have a special sacrament. Did you realize if you're married, you have a special sacrament by which they are fortified, meaning strengthened. Thus, they will increasingly advance the perfection of their own personalities as well as your mutual sanctification and hence contribute jointly to the glory of God. We already read that, but I wanted you to see it again in response to this idea of children as a good. So, just to summarize, by receiving the gifts of children and bringing them to their full human and Christian maturity, parents at the same time grow in the perfection of their own personalities, in their own personal holiness, and so move along this journey toward perfection. So parents, how many of you are already perfectly patient? How many of you are perfectly generous? How many of you are perfectly loving? How many of you always speak in a kind and charitable tone? So we have a little bit of perfection to doing, don't we? And guess what? Our children are built in for that. But teens and young adults, how many of you are perfectly patient? How many of you are perfectly generous in helping around the house or sacrificing for your parents or your friends? Okay. How many of you are perfectly loving? How many of you always speak in a kind and charitable tone of voice that's upbuilding and affirming, and you never use sarcastic words in your family? Do you see? It's a two-way street, isn't it? Children are not only a good for parents, but parents are a good for children. Right? It's this mutual working out of our vocation to holiness. Okay. Here's the bottom line. Conjugal love, or any kind of love, is never an impersonal act. I want to say that again. Conjugal love, or any kind of love, is never an impersonal act. It's never just a matter of whatever my preference is or just discharging my duty. Love is always personal. It's always a personal act if it's really love. It's always a matter of acting in a way that's a good for me and a good for the other. Because two persons are involved when something is a good. So we have to realize that there's no such thing as an impersonal act when we're talking about love. Okay, I want to just give an example of this. Let's say for a moment, I'm in downtown DC today instead of being here with all of you. And I walk by and I see a homeless person and they've got one of those little containers, you know, sitting there. And so I walk by and I drop in the container a $5 bill, and I walk away very satisfied with myself, right? Because I fulfilled my duty. Was that a loving act? No, it was not. Because it was an impersonal act. I just dropped the $5 in the container. It was really all about me. You see, I never encountered Pope Francis's favorite word. I never encountered the homeless person as person. Just as someone sitting there who had a need. There was no relationship. Person equals relationship. It was not a personal act. It was a highly impersonal act. How could I turn this impersonal act into a personal act? Into an act of love? How can I turn giving $5 to a homeless person into an act of love? What could I do? Pardon me? Shake their hand. Let's say they're sitting on the ground. What if I actually bent down, looked them in the eyes, said, "Hi, how are you doing today? My name's Katrina. What's your name? Here's $5 for you." Do you see how it turns it into a personal act? This is what we're talking about when we're talking about love. Love is always a personal act because it's always a good. Do you see how then that is a good for that person and a good for me? It's a two-way street. Okay, so hold this idea of personal versus impersonal act because hopefully we'll come back to it. Let's go on to section 10, whose title is Responsible Parenthood. So remember how often that was the buzzword in the majority report and the final majority opinion and final report. Responsible parenthood. So Paul VI, he's gonna build on that. So first of all, let's notice that the title is not the responsible limiting of births. It's responsible parenthood. Why? Because parenthood is a personal term. When you say parent, what does that imply? A child. So this is personalistic language. It's relational language. How can we exercise responsible parenthood? So following the steps of Gaudium et Spes, the language is going to be personalistic, and the emphasis is on the relational dimension. So first of all, he says responsible parenthood is part of the mission. Again, it would be so great. I mean, you could do a fabulous teaching in Couples for Christ on the mission of the married couple from Humanae Vitae, by pulling out all these places where he talks about the mission, the mission. So it's part of the mission of conjugal love. In other words, it's not an optional extra. Like, okay, if you're into that kind of mission, great. If you're not, no, it's part of the mission. Okay, let's give an example about mission. Okay, let's talk about my legs for a moment. Walking is part of the mission of my legs. It's not an optional add-on, right? We're talking about responsible parenthood. We're talking about children, right? He's saying children are not an optional add-on, but they're part of the mission of marriage and conjugal love. So just like my legs, walking is not an optional add-on for my legs, but it's part of their very nature, right? They have the potential to walk. And we know that part of being human is actualizing that. Wouldn't it be kind of strange if you one day saw me in a wheelchair and said to me, "Katrina, what happened?" And I said, oh, nothing. I'm just not into my legs walking, so I use a wheelchair. Haven't you heard people say that? Oh, we're just not into children, so we're not going to have any. You see, procreation, responsible parenthood, children, it's part of the very mission of marriage and of conjugal love. This is how spouses carry out the nature of marriage and conjugal love, just like how my legs carry out their nature by walking. After this emphasis on mission, Paul VI looks at how responsible parenthood is exercised. So first of all, he says we have to take into account the biological design of the body. Remember how we saw in the final report, the body was something sub-rational that we had to dominate and organize. He's saying, no, look. There's a biological design in the body. And we have to apply our human reason not to dominate it, but to knowing, learning, and honoring the laws of biology and human fertility. That's where our intellectual effort needs to go. Not how to dominate it by removing fertility, but understanding God's design within the body that's woven into our very being as male and female. What is the good news is in the last 50 years, science has made amazing progress in understanding human fertility and the biology. For instance, we know that men, all of you men out there, after puberty are basically fertile 24/7. Right? You have no fertility cycles. If you've gone through puberty and we haven't yet put you in the grave, well then you are fertile 24/7. Women are different. Women have a menstrual cycle, which means that generally out of the course of a month, 30 days or so, she's fertile or can conceive only about 6 or 7 days. We're different. But you see, we didn't understand that as well before as we do now. So blessed be God for the scientists who have dedicated their lives to us. This is what he's saying, how we need to apply our human reason, and being able to pinpoint then the signs that say that a woman's fertile, so we can understand that and take that into account. So we have to first apply our reason to knowing and honoring the laws of biology and human fertility. Secondly, he says, reason and will are responsible for directing and ordering what we call the passions of the soul. You all have them. They're all those emotions, those urges, those inclinations, those impulses, the appetites that we have that just arise within us. Like when you suddenly are hungry, do you decide, I'm going to decide to feel hungry. Stomach, make me feel hungry. Right? These things just arise in us. Think about when you get angry. Did you choose that anger? No, it just arose in you. But the point is then you choose what you do with that. He's saying that's where our human reason and our will come in. You don't have to raise your hands, but I'm sure that some of you who are married have experienced a sexual attraction to someone who is not your spouse. What do you do with that? Do you just act on it because it's your feeling? Of course not. You understand, don't knock him off the chair. You understand that our reason and our will takes those things that arise in us, that happen in us, and we have to order them for our good and the good of others. We have to order them, which means sometimes we act on them and sometimes we don't. So this idea that sexual attraction is natural is true. But what you do with it is human. It's very important. We're not human persons, not animals. So it's simply because we feel something, and even if we feel it intensely, doesn't give us the green light to act on it. So that's what the point he's making here. Why? Because what was the final report saying? It's too hard. Right? We have these feelings. We have these urges. And it's too difficult to abstain. And he's saying, no, that's exactly why we've been given intellect and free will and grace, so that we can order these things. Third, Paul VI approaches the very circumstances and concerns that the pastoral approaches document brought up. So they talk about the physical, economic, psychological, and social factors or conditions that face married couples. He says that. He quotes that exactly. And here's what he says in response. Responsible parenthood, he says, yes, these things are true. But responsible parenthood is exercised by those who, guided by prudent consideration and generosity, elect to accept many children. Is that what you would have expected him to say? After saying, oh yes, there are these challenges. Psychological, social, physical, economic. And he says, one way we respond to those, as in responsible parenthood, is giving a generous yes to God. That's one aspect of responsible parenthood. I think this is a great example of his courage. Man, he just met head on what the final report said. And he said, yes, this is true, but this is how God calls us to respond. Generously. Generously. But that's not the end of the section. Fourth, and finally, he recognizes a fourth consideration to responsible parenthood. He says those are considered responsible who, for serious reasons, okay, Lambeth Conference, right? Serious reasons, and with due respect for moral precepts, decide not to have another child for either a definite or an indefinite amount of time. So can it be responsible to postpone having children? Yes. But notice what he cites first, the generous response. And then there might be reasons for why we need to postpone or perhaps avoid altogether. For instance, if you've been told you will die if you have another child, well, then that means there's kind of an indefinite postponement of having children. So he emphasizes both a generous yes to new life, but also serious consideration of when receiving new life from God's creative love needs to be delayed or deferred. I find him very balanced. So the latter aspect, right, when we need to delay, is where the controversy and the tension lies. So in other words, what justifies a decision to postpone welcoming another child? Paul VI is going to answer this in number 10. We're still in number 10. For this reason, in regard to the mission, hear it again, the mission of transmitting human life, it is not right for spouses to act in accord with their own arbitrary judgment. Very important. As if it were permissible for them to define altogether subjectively, meaning just according to their own opinions and ideas and feelings, subjectively and willfully what is right for them to do. On the contrary, they must accommodate their behavior to the plan of God the Creator, a plan made manifest both by the nature of marriage and its acts and also by the constant teaching of the church. Okay, so now we're starting to get into the very meat of church teaching. So he's drawing here directly from Gaudium et Spes 50 and 51. And what he's saying is that even though we're very intelligent, we don't create our own morality. Right? This idea, oh, well, that might be true for you, but it's not true for me. If something is true, it's true for everybody. We don't create our own morality. And just because science and technology can do something doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. This is what we're butting up against right now. If science and technology can do it, well, why not? So I attended a talk this last Tuesday, and one of the speakers described an experiment on 40 or so living embryos. They had been obtained by abortion, but they were still alive. And this experiment was to inject into these embryos certain substances to see how their bodies would react. And then they were allowed to die. So then they could examine them. Is that ethical? Is that moral? Was that a good for those babies? Why not? I mean, science can do it, so why not? Do you see how just because science can do something doesn't mean it was a good? What was the motivation behind this? It was a big corporation trying to test out how they could help babies that are allergic to certain formulas, how they could create a new formula that these babies wouldn't react to. So they're experimenting on 40 embryos and letting them die so they can make a better baby formula. What's the motivation? Money. This is why we have to, again, be so careful. Just because technology can do something doesn't mean it's right, nor that it's good. This is what we're facing right now, isn't it? Can you think of some issues where, because technology can do it, people are saying they have a right to it? They have to do with the body and changing significantly the shape of the body? You see, we're in the midst of completely redefining marriage, love, sex, family, even gender, according to what science and technology can accomplish. And whatever we feel will make us happy, according to our sincere intentions. Notice what Paul VI said in number 10. It is not right for spouses to act in accord with their own arbitrary judgment. Even if, he doesn't say it, but in Gaudium et Spes, even if it's these sincere intentions. I just wanted to bring back to mind the 1992 Supreme Court decision I quoted a year ago when we did the Theology of the Body workshop in Baltimore. Because this is one of the reasons why we're in the mess we're in. This is what the Supreme Court said in Casey versus Planned Parenthood. At the heart of liberty, meaning freedom, is the right to define one's own concept of existence, of meaning, of the universe, and of the mystery of human life. Who is God, according to that quote? Every single person. I'm God. You're God. You're God. Because we have the right to define the meaning of life, the meaning of the universe, the meaning of the mystery of human life. So this is why it's so important that we don't just let the anniversary of Humanae Vitae go by us. It's so important that we celebrate the 50th anniversary to remind ourselves what our culture is erasing from our cultural memory. That from the beginning, God wove the meaning of marriage and the conjugal embrace into the very nature of conjugal love. And our job is to use our human reason to understand this mission of conjugal love. And then we engage our freedom and our will to live it out. Not to go resort to technology to make ourselves into whatever we want to make ourselves into. It's to recover this. So that begs the question of the day where we've been leading. What is the meaning or the nature of conjugal love? That's the question we have to ask. Because if we answer that question, we will understand sex. We will understand the conjugal embrace, because the conjugal embrace is an expression of conjugal love. All right. Oh, it's over here. Excuse me for a moment. I have to grab something. Oh, nope, I'm wrong. It's over here. I just needed to walk for a moment. Okay, I have something here that will help us understand the nature of conjugal love. Dun, dun, da, da. My blue salad tongs. All right, so I have salad tongs here. These salad tongs are made up of a big spoon and a big fork, correct? If I have just the big fork, do I have salad tongs? No, I have a fork that I can stick someone with. If I have just the spoon, the big spoon, do I have salad tongs? No, I have a spoon that I can bop someone over the head with. It's only when I unite them and put them together that I now have the one new reality of the salad tongs. This is going to be at the heart of Paul VI's teaching on conjugal love. Obviously not salad tongues, right? But this idea that we have a reality that is composed of two dimensions. What are the two dimensions of the salad tongues? Right? A spoon and a fork. And it's only when I put them together that I have the one new reality of the salad tongues. Do you see how I have to have the two of them united? Inseparable. In order to have the salad tongs. So this leads to one of my favorite phrases called one reality, two dimensions. So I'm going to say one reality, I want you to say two dimensions. Here we go, you ready? One reality? Excellent. One reality? Great. Let's look at how Paul VI in Humanae Vitae number 12 describes one reality with two dimensions. This is in the title, this is in the section entitled Two Inseparable Aspects, Union and Procreation. This particular doctrine often expounded by the magisterium. Did he just suddenly create it, invent it? Is it his opinion? No, it's unbroken church teaching. Often expounded by the magisterium of the church is based on the inseparable connection established by God. Who established conjugal love in this way? God. Established by God, which man on his own initiative may not break. Between the unitive significance and the procreative significance, which are both inherent to the marriage act. Or sometimes we say the unitive dimension and the procreative dimension. That's another way of saying it. Okay, this is it. This is the crescendo. This is what we've been working toward all day. There's an unbreakable, an inseparable connection between the two meanings, through the two dimensions of the conjugal love that are expressed in the conjugal embrace. What are those two meanings or those two dimensions? The unitive meaning and the procreative meaning. Wonderful. If I have just the unitive meaning, do I have spousal love? If I have just the procreative meaning, do I have spousal love? No, you see, it's only when I unite inseparably the unitive and the procreative dimensions of conjugal love and express them in the most profound way possible, which is through the conjugal act, do we have spousal love. But our culture is saying, you can take it apart. If you want, just have the unitive dimension. Just have sex. Or if you want, don't have sex. Just have the procreative dimension. Go use IVF. You don't want to be married? You don't want to have a husband? Great, we got sperm banks for you. Do you see, our culture is saying this is normal. And the church in her unbroken teaching and Paul VI is saying no, this is normal. Because conjugal love, to be conjugal love, there are other kinds of love, like friendship love. Friendship love is not procreative. So you can see it's not the same kind of love. It's conjugal love that is both unitive and procreative. Because conjugal love is the one reality with two dimensions. Unitive and procreative. That is what he is putting before us in this beautiful expression. So I would say that notice that the hierarchy of ends, it's not there anymore. As it wasn't either in God Im et Spes. Because now we have an understanding that deepens our understanding of conjugal love and of the conjugal act. Here's what I would say. The courage and brilliance of Paul VI, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, and I'm sure intense prayer and reflection, is that he articulates in a new and definitive way what church teaching in the 20th century had been moving toward, this development of doctrine, that there's an interior structure to conjugal love. It's not just an external act, like taking a sip of water. It's like an external act. There's no really interior meaning to that act. I just took a sip of water. It is a function. I was thirsty. I fulfilled the function. The sexual act is not primarily a function. It is a human act. It is a gift of self. It is an act that has deep and profound meaning. And it's not a meaning that's ordered this way. It's a meaning that is expansive this way. And so his brilliance is to realize that the conjugal embrace, as an expression of conjugal love, has this one reality with two dimensions. The unitive and the procreative. So it's only when we unite these two together in this unbreakable bond of love that we have the new reality of spousal love, that we have the union of the bodies. What kind of union? A one flesh union of husband and wife. In a unitive love that is fruitful, that is life-giving, because that's the nature of love. How do we know the church isn't just imposing this meaning from the outside? Like, okay, that's just what the church says. Because of the shape of the masculine and feminine body. The church didn't make it up. Again, God didn't just arbitrarily say, you have to do this because I said so. No, he made our bodies as a profound sign. Do you realize everywhere you walk, you are a sign? You're a feminine sign or a masculine sign. And what happens if we have the two realities completely separate? Do we ever understand? If we have the two dimensions completely separate, do we ever understand the one reality? You see, the female body, as Christopher West likes to say, makes no sense by itself. The male body makes no sense by itself. You see, our bodies are a sign, not in isolation, but together. that we're made for a union of love. This is what your body tells the world. John Paul II calls it the language of the body. Your body says, I am made for a unitive love that's fruitful, that's life-giving. This is not something the church made up or imposed. It's right here in the very nature of the shape of our bodies. Sex is the most sacred and profound act that can occur between two human persons. Why? Because it's where we touch. It's where we actualize most fully what? Our human nature. It's the most profound act that we can enter into as human persons, because we can most profoundly express the meaning and purpose of our human nature by giving the total gift of ourselves and experience this unitive love that's fruitful in a fully human way. Two people on a college campus that just hook up for one night? Are they experiencing this? Can we say that's a good for them? Absolutely not. Can you see how? It's hard to say it, but it's intrinsically evil. It's damaging, it's impeding, it's yanking them out of God's plan for their lives, for their human nature, for their eternal life with Him. So this is why the unitive and procreative dimensions of the conjugal brace can never be separated. Because it's an expression of our human nature. You see, we're talking about human nature when we're talking about unitive and procreative in the conjugal act. And this is symbolized and made visible by our masculine and feminine bodies. So let's just see how Paul VI summarizes this truth in number 12, right after the part we just read. Therefore, because of its intrinsic nature, meaning the inner structure, the conjugal act which unites husband and wife with the closest of bonds also makes them capable of bringing forth new life according to the laws written into their very nature as male and female. It's our nature as male-female that we symbolize, and we can truly enter into this love that has these dual dimensions, union and life-giving. Can we ignore the meaning of a sign? Of course you can. How many of you have ever rolled through a stop sign? You just ignored the meaning of a sign. Or how about when the light turns red and you gun the gas? You've just ignored the meaning of a sign. This is what's happening in our culture. Our culture is not just ignoring, but trying to destroy the sign. Our masculine and feminine bodies have meaning. They are a sign that point to a unitive love that is fruitful, that is life-giving. And so this is why we have to recapture all of these elements and understand that the conjugal act is the most profound expression of this. So my hope is that we can hear with new ears and understand with a new heart why Humanae Vitae, why Paul VI taught what he did. Because he understood a deeper reality than just this structured hierarchy. Okay, do this and you'll be a good Catholic. No, live this way. Live in every situation the unitive and fruitfulness of your body, and then in the marital embrace, you will experience love. And you will experience true happiness. That's what he's saying. Because you're living according to your nature. Okay, we're almost done. We just have to look at one more thing. And then we'll go to question and answers. I know it's long. Sorry. So what if we say, okay, that's great, but that's the ideal. You know, no one can really live the ideal. So, you know, in the day-to-day complexities of life, it's just too demanding. So can't we just say that, okay, that's the ideal, but every act of intercourse doesn't have to preserve both the unitive and procreative meanings, just so long as the majority do? Can you see the logic? Like, it's too hard, This is the final report. This is what was this was the logic that was used to recommend changing church teaching. So we need to go back just one section to number 11, because remember how we saw those quotes where the final report said each and every marital act did not need to be open to life. Now here is his explicit response to that. Number 11. But the church, which interprets natural law through its unchanging doctrine, teaches that it is necessary that each conjugal act remain ordained in itself to the procreation of human life. Is it clear? Each and every conjugal act must remain in itself ordained to new life. Why? Because this is the structure of our humanity. So we can't just say, well, sometimes yes, sometimes no. It's like saying, well, sometimes I'll be human and sometimes I won't. You're always human. And it gets back to where we made that distinction between personal and impersonal act. If you separate the unitive from the procreative, it's no longer a personal act, because your whole person is no longer involved. So we are damaging ourselves at the very core of who we are. We're allowing a little bit, again, pardon the expression, of the manure to seep into our conjugal love and our conjugal relations. So what's the answer? The answer is marriage is a capital S sacrament. That's why I gave you all the quotes on it. That's why it's so important to see the development of doctrine. You are not left on your own. God is journeying with you. He's giving you a special sacrament by which to be able to live out the high calling of the gospel. Love one another as I have loved you. Mutual self-bestowal and receival. Total gift of self. And the tragedy is that contraception comes in and it violates this. In every single instance. We can never, ever say that contraception is a good. Isn't it a gift to be Catholic? I mean, I just think, oh Lord, you have preserved me from so many times. I could have wandered off the path, because I'm not smart enough to think all this through. I can read it all and then try to summarize it and offer it back to you. But wow, what the church has in her wisdom and offers us. So I want to really encourage you, especially when there's a teaching of the church that you don't understand fully, give your heart to the church and say, I believe that you have my best interest. I believe you know more than I know. I believe that you want what is good for me, and help me to understand why it is a good for me. And we will make so much more progress at overcoming this great divide in our church, in our family, from those who feel free that they can disagree and dissent from Catholic Church teaching, and therefore introduce this unfortunate separation into the church. So may we be part of the healing of that rupture. May we be part of bringing the body of Christ, even just within our own Catholic Church and our families, back together again, so that we can all know that we are made for a unitive love that's fruitful, a unitive love that is life-giving, whether we are 2, 22, or 102. Okay, God bless you. Thank you so much. Who would like to be courageous and ask the first question? Well, I had a conversation with someone, wherever you are. Do you want to ask the question about schools? Whoever asked me that question. Yes. Over. All right. Whoops.
I have a two-part question.
It's still not working.
I just have
A two-part question, okay?
one is the decision about the Lino Lakes.
About what?
The Lino Lakes decision. Are you familiar with the Lino Lakes decision?
I am not.
Okay. I guess it had to do with the separation of the colleges, Catholic colleges, from the authority of the church and what they're teaching.
Okay.
To separate themselves. And I was just wondering, because it was in 1967 that it happened.
Oh, interesting.
And
Thank you for
it came
educating
along
me.
the same lines of when
Right.
Humanae Vitae came.
Okay.
And because I think that caused the Catholic universities to be more liberal. And now I think with Pope St. John Paul II put out his document on Ecclesia Cordae or something that kind of said that no, the authority of the church, they must obey and follow. Which I think now that's what some of the Catholic universities going back
Right.
from liberal to conservative.
Yes. So first of all, we have to be really clear that Catholic universities need to be faithful to church teaching on faith and morals. You know, the church isn't going to come in and necessarily tell you how to teach math. But if it's a Catholic university on faith and morals, oh, this is such a good idea. You guys are getting a shot of sugar. So that's a brilliant idea. I love it. Feel free just to continue. And that's great. So anyone else who'd like to indulge back there, and we'll just continue our discussion. I think it's important, again, this is why the history is so helpful. 1967. Remember everything that's going on culturally in terms of Vietnam. We have the sexual revolution going on. We have the population bomb going on. And one of the reasons why that Humanae Vitae was dissented from so quickly is because we already had Catholic theologians who were teaching, and some of them were on the commission, the Birth Control Commission. And so they were already in universities and places. So it's not like Humanae Vitae suddenly provoked this disagreement. They were already in disagreement. And the fact that Paul VI didn't change church teaching just kind of lit a match to the kindling and just let it go. And so I'm not surprised that 1967 that occurred.
July 2023 in Notre Dame, they drafted the statement of Lino Lakes stating that the Declaration of Independence of Catholic Universities from authority of whatever kind, lay or clerical, is external to the academic community itself.
Fascinating. Well, of course, my question in this now, we can talk about any kind of Catholic educational institution or health organization. Why is it so valuable to you to have the word Catholic in the name of your institution if that's not core to your identity in terms of a Catholic worldview and understanding the sacramentality of creation and how God has created matter and creation with a meaning and a purpose? Because ultimately that's really what it comes down to. You know, we're really arguing over this. We're arguing over what is matter. Can we just do whatever we want with matter, with the material world? Or do we have to follow certain moral norms? And the answer is, if you want to be happy, if you want to fully live out your human nature, well then yes, you want to follow those moral norms because it's really where you will be most free.
And the second part question I had was, how is this kind of seep into public life and education, to the school, where it all starts in education, where the kids are being really taught, they're not going to private school.
Yes.
Some are going to public school. Some of these things are being taught, are seeping in some of these.
Yes, that's really an excellent question. So I thought that question might come up, so I brought with me this document. It's called Schools in Transition, and it's put out by the National Education Association, NEA, and a collaboration of other organizations that, for the most part, are in the forefront of promoting LGBTQ plus rights. So in other words, you've probably seen the list of letters. I just find it helpful just to say LGBTQ plus Or sometimes I just say Q+, because it just means whatever expression you want to come up with. So they have drafted these guidelines that they are proposing be implemented in every public grade school. Now, how can that be? Because remember, public grade school funding is tied to government funding. And so they can mandate something like this, and if you don't follow it, or if you transgress it, guess what happens to your funding? It disappears. So please know, this is very important, this conflict over who the human person is has an economic component to it. Because if we will not bow the knee to changing the nature of the human person to be whatever we want to construct it, we're going to have economic consequences. We've already seen this, right, with bakers, florists. We're going to see it, we'll start seeing it with teachers, schools. So let me just read you a couple things from these guidelines so that you know what's trying to be put into our schools. I'm quoting from chapter 1. One of the most prevalent misconceptions about gender is that it is based solely on a physical understanding of sex. In other words, what your body is. And that everyone fits into one of two opposite categories, male or female. This is a misunderstanding, according to them. This misconception, in turn, leads many to incorrectly assume that the body one is born with determines an individual's gender. Do you see what they're saying? That the body is not determinative of who we are. It's your will, it's your choice, it's your freedom of choice. Next section. Despite the tendency to conflate, that means to confuse, sexual orientation and gender, the two are very different. Sexual orientation and gender, the two are very different. Sexual orientation describes a person's sexual or romantic attractions, while gender identity refers to someone's own personal sense of being male, female, both, or neither. Did you catch that? Sexual orientation, your sexual romantic attraction, gender, what you feel yourself to be. Everyone has both a gender identity and a sexual orientation. Can you imagine this being taught to your 7-year-olds, your 8-year-olds? So this whole document is about how to have a gender-welcoming school environment. And the phrase that they use in here that I found disturbing was the term gender expansive. That's the term. We have to create an environment that is gender expansive. In other words, that welcomes and receives and helps our young people figure out what they are, what their gender identity is, what their sexual orientation is, etc., etc. This is what really helped me make all this concrete. This is called the gender unicorn. Has anyone ever seen this before? Yes. So this is what matches what we've just looked at in schools in transition. So this is according, again, this was made up by an organization to be used in public grade schools. So to teach as part of education that this is how we form our identity. So first of all, you have your gender identity, which is who you think you are. Okay, it's how you understand in your mind who you are. So you can be a boy, you can be a girl, you can be neither, you can be both, you can be anything else that you want to construct. So that's one aspect. And then we have who we are physically attracted to. And you can be physically attracted. Now, remember, we're talking 7, 8-year-olds. Do you remember girls have cooties?
Yes.
Okay? That's normal, you know, in this grade school age. So we're teaching them, okay, you've got to figure out who you're physically attracted to. Are you physically, do they even know what that means? Are you physically attracted to boys, to girls, to both, to neither, to some combination, or some other kind of expression? But it's not just physical attraction. Then you've got to distinguish, okay, who are you emotionally attracted to? Are you emotionally attracted to boys, to girls, to both, to neither, to some combination, or any other kind of construction? But we're not done yet. Okay, so who I think I am in my mind, who I am emotionally attracted to, who I'm sexually attracted to, physically attracted to. Now I have the option of how I want to express myself to the outside world. Do I want to gender express as a boy, as a girl, as both, as neither, as some kind of combination, or anything else I want to construct? And then you've got this thing here called your sex assigned at birth. Notice the language, assigned. Like, okay, we just labeled you something arbitrary. That you just happen to have this package down there, and so you're a boy, and you just happen to have a different package, so we arbitrarily assign you your sex as a girl. Can you hear with the language? The whole purpose then is to overcome this arbitrariness. I have to construct myself using all of these components. What do you see when you see this? I see confusion. I see heartache. I see absolute disintegration. I see weeping families. Weeping children who are adults who say, why wasn't I ever told before that I have one identity? It's called my human identity. And my human identity has these various components. But like the body, they all work together. See, we are an integrated whole. That's why when you have cancer, it's a disaster. Because part of your integrated whole has gone haywire. And we don't just say, oh, well, let's make another category of human person for you. You're a human person with cancer, we're just going to let your cancer go wild. We understand that that cancer is disintegrating to the whole of the body, to the integration of the body. And so now we are proposing something that completely destroys the fact that we as human persons have a nature. Because a nature means that you are an integrated whole that has a meaning and a purpose and is directed towards something. So this is why we did today. Like, we really cannot stand up much and talk about this. I can explain it to you, but you know what? I can't criticize it. Because I could end up in jail. I could end up with a lawsuit. We can talk about the straight stick. This is why I started with the straight stick. My brothers and sisters, don't get caught into arguing over the crooked stick. Keep talking about the straight stick, about what the male and female body is designed for. If we just look at that incredible act between a man and a woman, if we talk about what love is and what love is not. But this is work. I understand that. And so part of the job is to come up with what can be called catchphrases. You know, these little phrases like union and communion, right? We're made for union, communion. We're made for a unitive love that's fruitful and life-giving. Conjugal love is a unity of the two. Conjugal love is one reality in two dimensions, right? Wouldn't it be great if I could go up to an 8-year-old and say, one reality, two dimensions. So tell me, the one reality is conjugal love. What are the two dimensions? What are they? Unitive and procreative. You see, this is the way. Why? Because that's God's love for us. That's the interior life of the Trinity. That's the gift of Christ himself to us in the Eucharist. You see, so we have to be doing all this work on the straight stick. Because then when these things surface, we already have a context to be able to explain why it's wrong. This is why we had to talk about happiness. Because happiness has become the absolute in our culture. I have the right to choose whatever will make me happy. Is that true? Not according to our culture's understanding of happiness. It's false. You have the right to choose what is a good for you and a good for others, and therefore a good for the common good. We've lost the sense of the common good. And I was over in Manila 2 years ago, and you know this is starting to move in. This radical sense of individualism and a loss of the common good. But your culture still has it. Preserve it. Hold on to it. This is why I don't mean to be pessimistic, but the job of parenting and grandparenting is going to get harder before it gets easier. And the best thing we can do is form our young adults in this understanding of love and help them have the best friendships that they can. Committed friendships where they have to sacrifice, where their friends know, I will be there for you in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health. Because how do you learn how to live married life? By being a devoted friend, a faithful friend. So our young people, our teens need an inner core of 3 or 4 friends that they are bonded with, that they know they would do this for them. Because if they have learned how to do that, they will be outstanding husbands and wives. Okay, next question. Thank you so much for that question, because we've got to keep our antenna out there. If you have children in public school, please be asking, what's your policy on gender fluidity, on gender transitioning, on gender expansiveness? Do you have a gender transitioning ceremony that you use in your classroom? These are the questions. We don't want to get caught by surprise. Please, go ahead. Sorry.
All right. First of all, thank you, Katrina, for giving us a very fruitful and informative talk.
Thank you. That's a very kind way of putting it. Thank you.
Believing as a Christian family.
Thank you.
Of course, conjugal love. Now, my question is about directed towards the dissent, what that happened in when the Humanae Vitae happened,
yes,
right?
was promulgated. Yes.
In 1968, right?
68.
And
July.
Now, 50 years after.
Yes.
Is there such a thing as resurgence of this dissent?
Is there such a thing as?
Resurgence of this
A
dissent.
resurgence. This is why I cautioned us about this proposal to reopen they're not secret, but the non-public documents of the proceedings of the Birth Control Commission and Humanae Vitae. Because if the majority opinion and the final report starts to get circulated, we're going to have a huge resurgence. Because as you saw, much of the language is very positive. It's very appealing. And there are sections of the final report that all of us would agree to. But we can't agree to the outcome, nor to some, again, of the methodology. Where we're seeing this issue, not exact the dissent, we're confronting this right now with Catholics who are divorced and remarried without an annulment. So we are having a similar kind of tension over a very prominent and vocal group of bishops, primarily German, who are saying, no, all we want to do is change pastoral practice. Right? That's what was claimed for the majority opinion. We're not changing church doctrine. And we have a whole other saying, no, you are changing church doctrine, because if we truly believe in the indissolubility of the conjugal bond, if you are in a valid sacramental marriage, you are still in a conjugal bond with that person, even if you got a civil divorce. Because a civil divorce has nothing to do with God. It has only to do with law. And so it's very problematic to admit to communion someone who is living with someone who's not their spouse. according to the sacramental conjugal bond. So this is where it's very alive and well currently. In terms of birth control, contraception, I don't know the statistic. I was reluctant to put it in my talk, but you know, you hear statistics, something like 80% of Catholics use contraception and sterilization. Some astronomical number. Right there. There's the dissent. Is it the person, you know, Joe Catholic in the pew, for the most part, think that contraception is normal. A partial gift of self is normal. So it's there, but you know what? It's gone underground. Right? Because we just follow our conscience. And now you can get contraceptives. I mean, I still remember the first time I was shocked and I went into a grocery store and there were condoms just sitting there on the shelf. And like anyone could just reach out and take it. Because I grew up there behind a locked, glass cabinet. So I think a lot of things have changed so that people don't feel like they have to publicly dissent. They just, you know, do it privately, and they aren't aware of the woundedness and the division that introduces into their own life and into their relationships. Really excellent question.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm a student, and being in a public school all my life, they've always taught us about the LGBTQ community, and I've made a lot of friends from there. And in our Catholic Church, it always teaches that you choose to be like gay because it's not something that you're born with, it's not natural. But a lot of the stories I've heard from friends who are part of the community is that it came more of like as a self-actualization. And I try to stick to the morals of like the church, saying that, oh, they chose to be like that. But I also have a friend, and he's part of a really devout Catholic family, but he's gay, and his family doesn't exactly accept him for that.
Yes.
And it makes me question, like, why would you choose to be something that nobody accepts, like, nobody would accept you to be in?
It's a great question. What is your name?
Aaliyah.
Aaliyah, thank you for asking. I think that this is one of the hardest questions. So I'll see if I can give some kind of an answer to it. So first of all, thank you so much for asking the question. I just want to make just a slight correction. The church doesn't teach that they chose to be this way. That's very important. The church says that the origin, the ideology of same-sex attraction is still not fully understood. This is part of the problem. We're complicated as human persons. Our sexuality is complicated. There are all kinds of factors that come into it, including what your mother's emotional state could have been when you're in the womb. We also know that there are sins passed on generationally, which is why we do healing of family trees. So we have all kinds of factors that come into play informing our human sexuality and informing our human sexuality. So I think that's the first thing to recognize, is that we can't just pinpoint and say there's just one thing or one reason. I also have a number of friends who experience same-sex attraction, and for most of them, it wasn't something that they chose. So I understand exactly what you said. It was something, again, that arose within them, that kind of awakened within them, and they, for the most part, in those days, they really didn't know what else to do other than suppress it or follow it. And so I think that's a very important. So here's the problem. We now have two dynamics going on. You have a whole group of people with same-sex attraction and gender questioning for whom they don't feel like they have a choice in it. It's something that just arose within them. So when someone says, I feel like a girl trapped in a boy's body, or a boy trapped in a girl's body, or, you know, I'm just, you know, attracted to men. You know, I'm a man, I'm attracted to men. So there's this sense of which it's something that just arises within them without their consent. But here's the problem. Now we have a whole other group that says, no, this is what I choose. And actually, I'm exploring what my gender preference is. So I'm going to try this out, and then I'm going to try this. Do you see how the problem is we have two very different scenarios here. And so it's very hard to speak to both of them because they're very, very different. The person who's saying, essentially, I'm a blank slate, and I figure out what I want by trying it out and seeing if it fits me. Can I just say, this is implementing the experimental method for our gender. Think about what you do in the experimental method in science. You create a hypothesis, and then you create a circumstance situation to test that, and then you run that test, and then you evaluate it.
So right now in MTS history, we're actually
I'm sorry, Lil.
Sorry. So right now in history class, we're learning about the 1920s and basically the dynamic 20s where everything, like, it's leading up to sexual revolution and stuff like that. And there's fundamentalist versus modernism. And the churches slowly adapt to the modern morals of society at the time in the 1920s, especially the perversion of women, sexuality and stuff. And I thought about the same with same-sex marriage. I realized that the reason why we're against it is because we can't produce children. They can't produce children. But what if a gay couple takes a child and they raise it, a child that is in an adoption center,
right,
that can't be raised, isn't that also in a way helping give life? I mean,
yes, I understand your question. Right? Aren't they helping to give life to a child? This is why you'll notice the whole direction of today was not specifically about the conjugal act. What was it about? Conjugal love. The problem is that two men can never have conjugal love. Never. They can have a deep, bonded friendship. You have it. You call each other brothers, sisters. You see, it's a confusion of what conjugal love is. And that's why it's very important that we step back from just the act itself, from arguing this way. This is why it's so important that we went from this to this. Because the church, the bottom line is that two men cannot get married, two women can't get married, a man can't marry his dog. Why? Because it is impossible for the conjugal bond to come into existence between them. What do I mean? So we understand that because God is the author of marriage, it means God is the author of the conjugal bond, right? What God has joined, man cannot divide. When a man and a woman pledge the totality of themselves to each other, they give their consent to each other, we often say they marry each other. Actually what happens is God marries them. In that moment, when they give their consent, there's something supernatural that happens. That's why it's a sacrament. We can't see it. In that moment, when they give their consent to each other, God forms a supernatural conjugal bond that unites the two. The man and the woman. Are they two or are they one? Yes. 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 You see, they're in a supernatural conjugal bond. And through that conjugal bond, God can pour out His grace to them. But we can't see that. But guess what we can see? We can see the one flesh union between a husband and wife. You see, the first fruit of marriage is the supernatural conjugal bond that allows marriage to become a channel of grace. How? Through the actual union of the bodies of husband and wife in one flesh union. I'm sorry to be so blunt, but a man and a man can never have one flesh union. A woman and a woman can never have one flesh union. So just hang with me for a moment, because we are being told all the time that two men have sex, that two women have sex. It's not true. A man and a man engage in sexual activity. A woman and a woman engage in sexual activity. Sex means one flesh union. for a moment, and it's not very polite to speak about this, but you ask the question, and this is why it's the answer. The answer is not that they can't procreate. The answer is that they cannot enter into one flesh union. When a man enters another man in gay sexual activity, where that man enters the other man, where he enters is made to constrict and expel. That's the function of where he tries to enter another man. When a man enters a woman, where he enters was made to expand and receive. Why? So the two can become one flesh and they can abide in each other. They can rest in each other. That can never happen between a man and a woman. This is why two people of the same sex cannot marry. It's not first and foremost procreative. It's the one flesh union that defines marriage. So I think this is part of the problem, is we have, because this is what we're told, isn't it? Constantly. They can't marry because they can't have kids. That's why we had to do this whole day. This is why we started with the one flesh union. That's the framework I'm hoping you will think about in. And so we have to get back to speaking about what is conjugal love that distinguishes it from every other kind of love. So while it's very admirable that they would want to take in a child, we can't say that that is the fruit of conjugal love. We can say it's the fruit of altruistic love, of a deep friendship love, but also for that child is not being brought into a situation where he or she can ever encounter an actual unitive love that's fruitful. So it's multiple. Do you have anything you want to say back to that? No. Okay, I just want to make sure. No, really, because this question is so multi-layered. It's so multi-layered. Thank you for your courage to ask that. It's really, I do want to say, should we be friends with people who have same-sex attraction? Yes. Should we be friends with people who cohabitate? Yes. Should we be friends with people who struggle from alcoholism? Yes. Yes. What does it mean to love one another as I have loved you? We need to welcome these people into our lives and again help them see the straight stick. But what this means is multiple conversations. It means little steps. It means asking questions and then listening for a long time. Ask the people that you know who struggle with gender dysphoria, meaning feeling that they're trapped, or same-sex attraction. Tell me your story. When did it start? Did you always feel this way? Did you have an experience? I mean, there's some pretty unpleasant statistics, like the high percentage of people who were sexually abused as children that experienced same-sex attraction, especially among men. The number of women who've had very difficult encounters with men, so they don't feel safe around men. And so they feel emotionally safe with women. We have a history. Remember, this is all rather complicated. So I want to encourage us to not be so quick. Like, don't befriend someone to convert them. Befriend someone to love them as a person and help them to move along this path through your profound and committed love. Last question? Please, Katrina.
Asking for a friend.
Okay.
They had to leave early.
Oh, okay.
But so just in connection with that, if you have friends who plan on having same-sex marriage and they're Catholic, they attend Mass, and you gave us a lot of information to equip us how to explain. But how would you approach it, like, Christian correction? How would you approach this without ruining the relationship,
Yes.
the friendship, and also their relationship with the church?
Right. It's a really great question. These pastoral questions are tough, aren't they? Because part of it is, okay, we have principles, but then each situation, right, is distinct and unique. So again, thank you. So the situation is you have a Catholic couple. Well, I'm not sure how they're planning to be married. It must just be a civil marriage, because obviously it could never be sacramental and never in the church. So right there, that's problematic. Because I don't know if you know, but as baptized Catholics, the only kind of marriage that we can have is sacramental. In other words, this is hard to hear, but two baptized Catholics who are just in a civil marriage, that's not recognized as a marriage by the church. Because of our baptism, we have a baptismal character that lives within us. And that baptismal character is oriented toward the Eucharist and toward one flesh sacramental union. And so this is very difficult. So we have a lot of kind of formation and education we need to do about marriage in general for Catholics. First of all, that creates a little bit of a tension there. And so the question is, I'm sorry, so how would you approach it? I'm always interested in knowing, so tell me, what's your understanding of marriage? I mean, it's a great entry point. And again, don't ask it because, okay, you're just waiting till you can come in and stab them. We need to have exploratory conversations with people. And all the while, when this is happening, I'm always saying, come, Holy Spirit, come. Holy Spirit, show me. I just said, come, Holy Spirit, come. Holy Spirit, please guide me. I mean, I'm praying interiorly. When you stood up to ask that question, it's a tough question. And I just said, okay, Holy Spirit, please come. Because I don't have all the answers. We're still working them out. Okay, so this is what I really think we need to get better at. We just need to get better at having conversations where we listen and we explore, and we're not afraid to ask exploratory questions. So, they tell you, well, tell me, why do you think that? Okay, well, if this is true, well, then what do you think about that? Well, okay, if that's the case, well, then couldn't we say that this then would also? Because, look, sometimes what we don't do is we don't think out the logic of a position. If marriage is no longer between a man and a woman, because what distinguishes marriage is not procreation, but one flesh union, then if that no longer distinguishes marriage, then please tell me what does. Why should it only be two people? Why can't it be three people? Why does it have to be indissoluble? Why? Because there are proposals now out for contract marriages. You contract to get married, these are the proposals, for 3 years. Wow. And then you decide whether you want to renew the contract. Do you see what happens when we start changing? It's shocking. But look, what is marriage? Marriage has become, it's a contract between two people, but why not three people? And you decide the terms of the contract. So these are the kinds of things. Well, why only two men? Why not two men and a woman? They're called thruples, by the way. It's horrible, but it's a name. Thruples. So that's where I would start, because that's your question. Like, where would I start with them? And this is why, like, you need to really just keep thinking about this and talk about, do role plays among yourselves, right? Have, you be the friend, who's about to get married, and, someone else enter in the conversation of, okay, how can we work through this? So that create, when you have a conversation with someone and you hit upon, whatever I said was the great bumper sticker. Oh yeah, marriage is Eucharistic, Trinitarian, Sacramental, Holy Communion, right? Look, just right there. And say to them, you know what? Thank you for sharing with me what you believe. Would you mind if I shared with you what the church, what the Catholic Church teaches about marriage? So ask permission. Because most people have never really heard what the church teaches about marriage. They know, they think they know, but they haven't ever really heard really the straight stick. And this is why this understanding of the 3 one flesh unions, the one flesh union, the incarnation, the one flesh union, where next? In the Eucharist, the one flesh union in marriage, and ultimately the one flesh union in heaven. That's why this framework is important. Let me just say the most difficult conversation by far is with someone who is an atheist. By far. Who believes that death is the end of the story.
Yeah.
Well then, why not? Why not? Because there is no, I mean, all we can do is kind of argue from the structure of the body. So this is why we are in challenging times when evolutionary atheism is the order of the day. So I'm just trying to think if there's anything else. Just let me think for a moment on your question. Again, I just think if they're Catholic, it's so much more helpful. So again, just explore. Tell me, what's the Eucharist? Do you see? So try to explore these other areas that then give you some language and some concepts that then you can apply back to marriage. We don't want to treat marriage in an isolated manner, nor children, right, in an isolated manner. And that's kind of what we've done. And what I've tried to do today is fill your brains with lots and lots and lots and lots of how our faith makes so much sense overall. But sometimes we just have to stop and connect the dots. So I think we've done enough dot connecting. So thank you so very much for sharing this day with me. I'm happy, but okay.
Yeah. Could I ask the last question? Being in charge of the microphone, I am in a healthcare profession.
I'm sorry, what?
And healthcare profession. And sometimes we are faced, or most of the times you are consulted of ethical issues. With the advent of gene therapy that offers the promises solutions to multiple miscarriages, that offers solutions to the progressive devastating effect of genetic disease. What's your take on experimental study on human embryos that offers solutions to the agony and pain and sufferings of those couples who are trying hard to have a normal pregnancy and babies? And for those parents who are devastated with child with genetic disease.
Child with genetic diseases. So first of all, we always want to respond from the heart to experience the pain and suffering. Just like, again, someone who has gender dysphoria, that's incredible. There's incredible interior pain going on. Or someone who, for many people, experience same-sex attraction. To experience their pain and realize, try to think in our own lives, where have we felt something that might be parallel to the depth of what they're experiencing, so that we can really respond out of a human manner. I know that for me, as a single person who so desires to be married, it has helped me understand same-sex attraction for those who live chastity in a way I could never have understood. Because I came to understand that I'm created for a gift that I cannot give myself. In other words, I'm created for marriage, but I can't go out and demand it. I can't demand a man marry me. I can't demand that God send me a spouse. I'm created for a gift I cannot give myself. It's very important that we all realize this. People who struggle with infertility, this is exactly the pain. Can you give yourself a child? No, a child is a gift. A gift can only be given and received. So I think this is one of the things that we have to see in our own life where we've experienced this kind of poverty. And therefore try to be able to relate to these people who are experiencing this similar kind of poverty, of that they're created for a gift they cannot give themselves. Because that way first we can stand in solidarity with them. The other thing is just to remember a very simple principle: we can never do evil that good can come of it. We can never ever experiment on human embryos. Ever. Ever. It's intrinsically evil. We can't say, well, because it has a good intention or it has a good outcome. We can never do that. So there are absolute limits. The problem is that our technology and science have galloped way ahead of our ethics. So we have wonderful people working in the area of Catholic bioethics. And if you're not familiar with them, it would be very important to be in touch with them. John Haas, H-A-A-S, is a major leader in this. And so in that area, we can never do good. We can never do evil, that good may come of it, ever. The other thing is that in this whole area of technology, the other thing is that we can never, our science and our medicine is always meant to restore to what has been lost. So restore our health function. It's never to replace it, especially in the area of fertility. So again, this is a problem when we go in and we replace instead of bringing back to normal. This is why it's so exciting, all the work that's being done, especially in feminine biology and infertility. Incredible the way, because much technology doesn't address the root problem. You know, girls are given birth control pills all the time because they have painful periods, because they have excessive bleeding. But they never find out what the root cause of that is. So guess what? They go off the birth control pill and painful periods, excessive bleeding. So we have all kinds of research now that has been done in this area. So I think part of it is learning how to deal with our losses. It's learning how to deal, that's why I wrote the book entitled When Life Doesn't Go Your Way. It's learning how to deal. We thought this script was going to be the script of our lives. And now we're faced walking the way of the cross. And the real question is are we going to walk the way of the cross? Or are we going to walk away from the cross? And as brothers and sisters, we need to be there with each other. So these are very real, very painful situations, but it never justifies an evil. We can never, this is what the culture of death is about. The culture of death uses death as a solution for human problems. Death is never a solution for a human problem, which is essentially what happens in embryo research and in vitro fertilization. You're fertilizing 4, 5, 6 embryos and disposing of 3 or 4 in order hopefully to get 2 or 3 healthy children. That's the culture of death. We've just used death as a solution. In terms of genetic, I don't know. Because we were talking about it on the way down here this morning. That opens up a whole new door where, okay, by genetic testing, we think this might happen. But we don't know. Right? So a woman who carries the gene for now breast cancer, does she get proactively a double mastectomy? Well, then that causes all kinds of other problems in her body. So this, again, we've created situations where we don't have all the information. And so I'm really, what's the word? I'm a bit frightened about how we might use the information from genetic testing, because again, we think we have to go in and head off the problem, but we may never have that problem. I've heard so many testimonies of parents who had, who had testing on their children in vitro who were told your child is Down syndrome, your child is this, your child has, and the child was born, and they were told to have an abortion, and they refused, and the child was healthy. So please, my brothers and sisters, know science can be wrong. I'm sorry, it's not a very popular thing to say, but science can be wrong. And science also doesn't carry with itself often an ethical track along with it. It just says what's possible, not what's ethical. So thank you for your question. Wow, that was pretty hard. Okay, good.
Let's give a round of applause.
Katrina.
Wasn't this just such a full day?
Okay.